They want the light on people. I don't.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's 2:00. So welcome to the Transformation and Improvement Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before we start, I need to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Please also note that all remote participants are muted at the outset of the meeting and are only able to speak at the invitation of the chair. Please raise your virtual hand if you wish to speak, and then only unmute when the chair invites you to make your contribution. As chair, I may ask that you are muted if you do not participate in this way. I think before we start, we'll just introduce everybody who's here. If we start, Julian Dean's actually here, he's here as an observer. So if we start with Rosemary, is that right? We'll go around the table.
Rosemary Dartnell, councillor for Baston Hill, Colham and Sutton.
Tony Parsons, also councillor for Baston Hill, Colham and Sutton.
Becky Bullock, councillor for Whitchurch North.
Rob Gittins, councillor for Shrewsbury.
Dan Thomas, councillor for Muchwallock.
Tom Biggins, councillor for Whitchurch North.
Joyce Barrow, councillor for Oswestry Rural.
Councillor Gwilym Butler, councillor for Clibbury Mortimer, but I'm here in my role as cabinet member for Finance, Corporate Resources and Communities.
James Walton, executive of Resources. Andy Baker, the chief executive.
Claire Wild, Severn Valley, and I'm actually chairing the meeting.
Tom North, council scrutiny manager.
Claire Braddon, co-view and scrutiny officer.
Ashley Kendrick, Democratic Services Officer.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So the first item is apologies for absence. So we don't have Councillor Robert Tindall here. Has he offered his apologies or no? Okay, and Andrew Sherrington, has he offered his apologies?
No. No apologies received, Chair.
No apologies have been received. Okay, and I think, and Councillor Roger Evans hasn't sent his apologies either. Very unusual. Okay, thank you. Item number 2 is disclosable pecuniary interests. Do we have any? No. Fine, thank you. Moving on, item number 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Is everyone happy with those?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Roger's not here, so. Right, moving swiftly on, thank you. Public questions, there are none. Member questions, there are none. So item number 6 is the financial strategy 25 to 26 to the years 29-30. So we have James Walton, Ben J and Gwilym, who may wish to speak on this item. Is Ben on screen or not? No? So we just have James and Gwilym. James, would you like to
Can I just say a few words, Chair?
Gwilym? Yep, it's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gwilym Butler, Portfolio Finance, Corporate Resources and Communities. This is a normal process for the council to obviously bring the financial strategy forward for the foreseeable future, so we get that medium to longer term view. And it's almost like having our crystal ball, which constantly changes, but we have to have some sort of mindset of where we're going. Now, obviously, as we just had a change of government, there could be an awful lot of changes that may come down the course, and we will update you as and when any of those happen. The paper, to a certain extent, is what it is. It's where we see things at the moment. And before I hand over to James, I'd just, move the recommendations as stated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just for the people listening on screen, Councillor Evans has just joined the meeting. Do you want to introduce yourself, Roger?
Roger Evans, apologies for being late, councillor for the London division.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, James.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, just to continue from Gwilym's introduction. So this is the update in relation to the MTFS. It takes it forward to the 25-26 year from that was agreed at council in February. which included the current financial year. So this takes it forward through to 29/30. It's really just an early update. It's to try and set the foundations for what we currently know that has already changed between what we'd anticipated and set out in outline in February to where we are now, as at effectively at the end of June. There are a few areas that have been identified around the potential assumptions around council tax and around social care grant allocations, which are set out in the MTFS. But then there is also the risks associated with savings delivery and the potential for that, the impact on those going forward into future years. So it's not a significantly different report. It's really just setting out where we are going forward from the next financial year, and it starts to talk about the sustainability plan as opposed to the survival plan, and it starts to pick up on the areas that have been identified in the current financial year to ensure that we deliver a balanced budget as a foundation for the financial strategy going forward. But I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, James. I see Tony's little hands hovering above the buzzer. Did you want to ask a question, Tony?
Yeah, I did, and it's to do with obviously with the looking forward over the next.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's to do with looking forward over the next 5 years. I'm just trying to determine from the obviously there are two sets of figures. One's from February of this year, and then an update on that. What is the position looking like in terms of savings that this council will have to make over that medium term?
Okay, thank you, James.
So in the MTFS document itself, within figure 4, which is on page 22 of the I think that's of the report, figure 4 sets out the funding gap over the MTFS period. So in February, the 25/6 position looked like there was just short of £19 million funding gap. With the small adjustments that have been made so far, that's still at around about an £18 million funding gap. And then in the years beyond that, it tends to be down in single figures. So we've got £6 million saving gap for 6, 7 and 7, 8, and then a £5 million for 8, 9, and then it rises again in 29/30 up to just short of 13 million. So overall, over that whole period, that £48 million as a gap. The important point to remember though is, as you move out into those later financial years, the assumptions are much more spurious. They're less fixed. Any adjustments that are made in 25/26, as an example, will then have an impact on 6, 7 and 7, 8 and 8, 9. So again, that could impact on those later positions. And it's continually kept under review. And as was intimated before, we don't know what the implications are, just for example, of which was trailed in the manifesto, if I'm correct, around a new government setting multi-year settlements. So a 3-year settlement, for example, would mean 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8. We could be a lot firmer in terms of those figures, and therefore they may change.
Thank you.
Okay, have we got any other questions? Yeah, Rod.
Yes, just a very quick question on page 11 of the report. The report, sorry. Page 11, it says review of key assumptions for resources, under which it says business rates. You're looking at a growth of 1%, which is assumed. How are we basing that?
So in terms of business rates, we make an assumption every year in terms of where we think the changes will be around the multiplier. So there's an assumed growth rate, just in terms of general we can model, and that is impacted highly on things like rating revaluations and stuff, which can increase or as a result of people challenging those revaluations. We're still getting challenges back in 2017 that are just coming through now. So that will impact on the growth rate. In terms of the multiplier, which is shown at 1%, that is actually set in the October, if I remember correctly, preceding the financial next financial year. It should be based on CPI, but it's based on CPI with a ministerial oversight of that. So therefore, if CPI is big, it tends to be reduced down. So that kind of smoothing effect is there at the discretion of the minister at that point in time.
I was just going to say something, and I think the point is made across all of the reports today, is that as you move into the financial year, things can alter. So hopefully, the things that you are doing catch up. And that's reflected across all the reports, isn't it? So it is very difficult to make assumptions at the beginning of the year. Gwynn.
Just, if I may, Chair, on that point, members may be aware that I've tried to be as transparent as possible we can with the figures due to the situation, local government is finding itself. And that even includes, potential bad news, because the earlier we actually recognise it, it gives us more time within the financial year to do something about it. And I think we'll see that in later on reports as well. Thank you.
Yeah, because I think if you look back, usually when you get to quarters 3 and 4, things look quite different. Okay, so Rosemary and then Tony.
No, I'm
Oh, you're okay, Rosemary.
Thank you. I just want to ask, please, page 14 on the page 15, the table that shows us capital receipts and the shortages, capital increase loaning, increase borrowing, and so on and so forth. So we don't have enough capital receipts potential or enough that we know about so far to fund the new operating model, so the resizing. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, James.
Based on the assumptions that have been made at the moment, there's £33 million, which is the gap, which there is £60 million is brought forward. £33 million, therefore, is the identified gap, which doesn't just include the resizing, that includes other elements of the capital programme. And there are £21 million worth of capital receipts that can be identified at the moment against that target. So with the balance that's in hand and the way that those can be applied, if they relate to the HRA, for example, they have to be applied in the HRA. But if they're not, if they're general fund, then they can be applied in other areas. So there's a decision to be made about where borrowing can be applied and where capital receipts would be applied. So those adjustments need to be made, but on the base figures, the shortfall currently is 33, and the amount that's identified against that is 21. So there's an overall shortfall based on our current figures, yes.
Okay. Yes, carry on.
And so that continues through to the end of the MTF period, to 66 million borrowing needed to fund that, which is quite worrying. Can I just also say that in the projected green, is that the green from the RAGI? So what we're certain of, but those are incredibly low figures, 1.1 million, 65,000, and so on.
If you just respond to that, Chair, absolutely, they're very prudent figures in relation to what's shown as green. The other areas where there are bigger figures are shown against amber and red. The reason that they're flagged as green is because there's a very clear plan in place that will deliver in year. With the other areas, if they're red, it means that there is a clear plan in place, but the majority fall into the amber category where there is a clear plan. However, the delivery within year is the question. They will be delivered, but because of the nature of the market of selling assets, it may therefore spread into the next financial year. And unfortunately, the way that accounts work, if it's not in the bank by the 31st of March, it falls into the next year. So it's literally 1 day left, but it doesn't count. And that's why they've often flagged as amber.
Yeah, another question.
Yeah, just to say, so looking at this, it looks like you're planning at this point to have all the new operating models, the resizing within this financial year, because you're not carrying costs forward on that by the look of it. I know that's going to be part of that, where the knife falls, but
yeah, there's by Chair, there is an assumption around about it's the same with the whole capital programme. If something is flagged as being delivered within the year, we will identify that within that financial year. As we all know, lots of projects and programs slip over the year. Where those programs are attached with the delivery of a saving, then there is a different requirement to ensure that doesn't slip. If it's just a capital program, if I can just call it that, where there isn't a clear financial imperative around a saving, for example, then the impact of that slipping into a later year is less. And in fact, slipping other programs into later years means that there is less of a requirement to deliver those capital receipts as quickly. So it's often a balancing exercise. But with things like new operating model, with things like a resizing exercise, where the imperative is to deliver those as quickly as possible, you assume that entire cost all within the first year. And then that means that you've got a much stronger narrative around the delivery of the capital receipts that are necessary around that. You can still slip some of it, but you slip those benefits at the same time.
And I think as well, it's worth noting, James did allude to it a little bit earlier, is that James has to deal in fact, and accountants are naturally very prudent. So he can't say, well, actually, we've got this thing coming, but we're not sure if we're going to deliver it. He has to absolutely go and just rely on the facts. So it does seem a little drier than it perhaps is. Joyce.
Can I ask about the further assets being considered for disposal? There's quite a large amount of money there, and it does say considered. It's not saying.
Did you put your mic on, please?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, shall I repeat that?
Yeah, if you could, yeah.
Okay. Further assets being considered for disposal. It's quite a large amount, and I'm just wondering if it's considered, so they're not actually. You don't know yet what you're disposing of. Can you expand on that? What it is?
Can I just say something there, though? I think, Joyce, is that I think councils historically have always been in a difficult position because you can't actually say what you're proposing to do because a lot of it might be commercially sensitive. I don't know if Gwilym wants to add to anything before James says some more, but
I think you may have hit the nail on the head to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other problems to consider is if you were to put all the assets to market at the same time, you're going to downvalue. So it's a similar sort of thing. So you just have to be a bit cautious, I guess.
And so councils are at a disadvantage sometimes when they're selling things because everybody knows.
Yeah, I just wondered, Chair, about the amounts that are being shown there, because if you don't know what you are and when you are disposing of them, it's very difficult to put a figure on, I would have thought.
I mean, I think the truth probably is, Joyce, they know exactly where they are and what they've got. But they don't want to put that list in the public domain. That would be my guess from a commercial point of view. Ben, do you want to come back on that one?
Good. Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, there are two main groups of assets that the council has. One is the group of assets which are in ongoing operation, and the book value of those, not quite the same as the market value, but the book value is around about 400 million. By way of context and to respond to the councillor's question, there are a separate group of surplus assets which are now regarded as being surplus to operational requirements. The total value of assets within that group, which is more akin to a market value, is around about 50 million. And of those assets which could be brought forward from the potential to be sold through this year and next year, around about 20 million is being worked up. Some of that indeed, Chair, as you say, could be commercially sensitive, but there is that ongoing, very transparent split between the operating assets that we need to deliver services and assets which we believe are surplus, which can legitimately be sold on the market for a capital receipt. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are you happy, Joyce?
I'm happy.
Yep, okay. Oh, Roger. Roger and then Tony.
Thank you, Chairman. I have several questions, but it might deal with capital to start with. At the present time, it's estimated there could be £33 million of borrowing required. We're talking about next year, so has the repayment of that, or the beginning of the repayment for that, been factored into next year's financial estimates?
And I'd say that's a definite yes, but there you go. Are you going to answer that, James?
So where there is an assumption around capital receipt,
The answer is it will depend, because in some cases where the funding can only be funded from capital receipt, there are some things we can't fund from borrowing that you can fund from capital receipt.
Through you, Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm saying that if we need to borrow money, that capital receipts or whatever, if we need to borrow money, the borrowing that we have to pay back goes on to the other side of the equation. So
Yeah.
has that been built in to the financial strategy for next year? And if so, how much of that has been built in?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get to. Sorry, Chair. Where there is an assumption around capital receipts, in some cases we can't borrow for the use of that, so that will not be factored in to the next year. So if there are certain instances, for example, an example would be funding redundancy costs. So they can be funded from capital receipts; they cannot be funded from borrowing. So no, that is not built into next year because you cannot factor that in. If, however, there are other elements where we have made an assumption around a back-to-back, so an asset has been sold and the capital receipts therefore been ring-fenced for the purposes of developing something new on the site, yes, that could be replaced by borrowing, and yes, that will be factored into our supplement going forward within the capital strategy.
Just to interrupt you just a second there. So, James, just to be clear, that we have enough capital receipts to sell to pay for the redundancy costs.
The assumption at the moment is that overall, for the whole programme, there's £33 million requirement that we don't have all of the capital receipts for.
Yeah.
So there is a choice to be made around which of those elements. So it would be wrong for me to say we don't have the money to fund the redundancies. But the reality is that we do have a shortfall overall at the moment, and so something will have to be made around which part of that programme will be funded by borrowing and redundancies.
So you're saying that the 33 million is related solely to redundancies?
No, sorry, I'm not saying.
So that's the bit I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. So there is an assumption around redundancies which is within the capital requirement overall.
Yeah.
And there is, so you've got entire requirement for capital receipts, some of which has to be funded by capital receipts, some of which doesn't. And then we've got the shortfall against that. So what we don't have, what I can't tell you right now, is the exact figures that are making all of those elements up and where the shortfall would fall against that.
Yeah.
It's something to be worked.
But what you're saying on here is that you have earmarked £20 million of assets to sell. So one would make the assumption that within that figure, there is enough money to pay the redundancies. I think that's what I'm trying to tease out.
Yeah, and to be fair, Chair, that would be our priority.
Yeah,
that would be
okay.
a cost.
Sorry, Roger. Yes,
but it can be funded from revenue, so there is a choice to be made.
So am I right in assuming then, if we get the 21 million, there's still £12 million worth of borrowing, which is estimated we will need to make this year? So I ask again, and it says there, shortfall to be financed from prudential borrowing stroke surplus to carry forward. Has the cost of that prudential borrowing been built in to the financial strategy for next year and all the following years?
And the answer is no, not all of that, because some of it, depending on how it falls, some of that may not be funded from borrowing, therefore it can't be factored in.
But I think what she's trying to say, James, is I think anyway, is that okay, so you've got 33 million of capital outstanding. You've earmarked £20 million worth of assets to come back in. Okay. So is there an assumption that £12 million will need to be borrowed? Because if there is, then the interest on that should surely be within the forecast. I think that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah,
and I think you'd be wrong if you didn't do that.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be, and it's really difficult to try and explain this. I'm trying my best. In terms of that £12 million shortfall, if some of that cannot be charged to capital, we cannot. If we can't be charged to borrowing, it can't be funded from borrowing, we cannot make that assumption. So where does that money come from? It means it will be charged to revenue this year. So that it doesn't become a borrowing cost. So if that £12 million shortfall is not funded from capital receipts, and it was all elements that can only be funded from capital receipts, the only place it could fall would be on the revenue account.
Right,
So
okay.
you would have a £12
Yeah.
million additional overspending.
Additional
You
overspend.
could not assume borrowing for it next year.
Okay,
That's the
I
point
get
I'm
that.
trying to make. But it's not as simple as that 12 million would all fall in revenue. It will be a mix, because there's a mix of different elements of that we need to work through.
Okay, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. It says the medium-term financial is to secure a sustainable financial position across the coming years. That's the reason for it, to see where we are in the coming years. I do note that on page 12 of the report, it says July, period 3 monitoring report produced. I presume it might be produced sometime in July. I'm not sure, because we're looking at period 2 today, later on. So period 3, when will we as members actually see that?
So the period 3 is the quarter 1. Same, it's just slightly different name, and that is always taken to cabinet in September.
If I can, Chair, on the list says it here, it says July, period 3 monitoring report produced for 24-25, including savings delivery. So that is incorrect then. It won't be produced, and it will be produced in September. I'm interested in when I can see it, the public can see it. So the production may be for internal use, so it is going to be in September then. And will the one for period 5 also be published in September? Because that says again, period 4 monitoring report produced in August.
If I may, Chair, yeah. So the timetable there is showing when that information will be produced. So it says period 2 for June. That's when that information was produced as at the end of May. That is then reported through to Cabinet, as you know, 17th of July, because that's going this week. The period 3, quarter 1, is produced as at the end of June. It's produced in July. It's then on the forward plan to say that will be considered. I think it's 11th September from memory. That will be considered. All of the period 4, 5, 6, they're all on the forward plan to say when they will be considered at the time. Unfortunately, because there are no cabinet meetings in August, we can't take the period 3 in August. That's always been the case. It has to go to September, by which time the period 4 will be at the end of July, will be ready. But obviously we need to take the period 3 before we take the period 4.
For you, Chairman, as a scrutiny committee, under the rules, the scrutiny committee can see any paper that is published. It does not say it has to go to cabinet first. So if the paper is published, the scrutiny committee can actually expect to see that paper. Yeah. We haven't got another meeting until September, but if there is a special meeting for any reason of the scrutiny committee, we could ask for that report to come prior to it going to cabinet.
The Chair, there's absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. Our timetable, though, is not built around a special meeting for scrutiny happening in August. So if that were to happen, we need early sight of that because we're geared up to producing that paper to produce it for September time. So that's what's been agreed.
In fairness, Roger, our meetings are light to September, so I think we're going to see that before cabinet.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So I've
got some other questions.
Yeah. Well, can you just give? I think was it.
It was me. Yeah.
Tony, and then Julie wants to ask a question. Okay, go ahead, Tony.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, it's just in this appendix that we're looking at the present time. Item 6, project risks, capital projects impacting on revenue, i.e. capital expenditure on capital projects that don't then progress, falling back onto the revenue budget. I mean, do we see that as being something that we could be vulnerable for?
Depends which project, I think, Tony.
I didn't say.
Yeah. James,
through you, Chair. The idea of identifying those 7 areas was that we were trying to be all-encompassing
and identify the 7 areas that we think, pieces of the jigsaw, all of those 7 pieces need to fit into place to ensure that we balance the books this year. So do we, what we haven't done as part of this is rated those or looked through at what the likelihood and implication of those are. We haven't put that into the report. So we're just flagging it really just so that people can get their head around the fact that there are 7 elements to managing the overall risk. Absolutely, as the chair alluded to, different projects will have different financial implications. So something that has a few £100,000 is not going to break the bank. Something that has multi-million pounds could. So that's why we're flagging it, because all of those need to be managed. At this point in time, we are not flagging any of those as a risk that's crystallising. We're just flagging them as a risk that we need to take account of.
Okay, Gwynn, do you just want to?
Very briefly, I was quite supportive, I guess, when the new government came in, that their priorities are economy, infrastructure and housing. And I just hope they will support our plans for Shrewsbury.
Thank you, Gwynn. Yeah, beat me to it. Is that it, Tony?
I think so.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'm going to let Julian ask a question and then...
I've only asked one question, Chairman.
Well,
my colleagues have asked 3 or 4.
Hold on a minute. Well, to my mind, you came back about 3 different times.
It was about the capital. It was about the capital borrowing. That's the only question I asked.
Okay, all right, Roger. So I'm going to let Julian ask a question now, and then I'll come back to you. Julian.
I suppose in the interest of this not being completely abstract debate that nobody is going to understand, it would actually be useful to have some examples of these projects which we think are risky. So I'm going to ask it. So in terms of, so you specifically said that there were projects that could only be funded by capital receipts and couldn't be funded by borrowing. And if we ended up in a situation where those capital receipts didn't come forward, that would fall on the revenue account. So can you, what specific projects do you have in mind that those rules apply to? And then I suppose following up as well in terms of item 6 on page 15, project risks. There are specific projects where there is some risk, which looks like a slightly different risk. So I'm going to try and keep my question short. But which capital projects are out there which you consider to be risky for the council at the present time?
Okay.
So in terms of the areas that can only be used, we can only use capital receipts and we can't borrow. This would be where we have the approval, which was agreed by council under the government requirements, that we are using capital receipts for transformation purposes. So if it's been used for transformation purposes, it can only be funded from capital receipts. And I mentioned earlier about the costs of voluntary redundancy costs. That is an area that's well established across local government, which is considered a transformational cost, because fundamentally, why are you making those redundancies? You're not going to change the underlying way in which the organisation is going to work. So that's an example where you couldn't then borrow. So you would have that those costs are funded. They're funded from revenue. There was just an opportunity to then charge those out, take those out of the revenue account, and charge them against capital receipts. In terms of the project risks associated with number 6, so this is across the board. So this is any capital projects that we have whereby there is a risk associated with delivery, or could be a risk associated with delivery. This doesn't just relate though to capital receipts. So an example would be where we have significant government funding or legacy European funding. If there is any element of those whereby grant is called back, then that would mean that the costs associated with that potentially would fall upon the revenue account. If we have capital assets that are being delivered, but the scheme is cancelled or is pulled or cannot be delivered for whatever reason, if those capital assets are not in a place whereby capital can be applied to an asset there which is able to absorb those costs, then the costs get written off to the revenue account. So it applies across a number of projects. Obviously, there are some very high profile, high scale, high value projects which will be included within this. As I say, at this point in time, we are flagging the risk. we don't have any indications that there is any significant cost to fall on revenue as a result of any of those projects being cancelled or not being delivered for whatever reason. Clearly, Gwilym alluded to support from the new government for certain types of projects. There could also be a removal of support for certain types of projects, and that could fall anywhere across the board. So we're flagging it. We knew that the general election would be sometime this year. We flagged it early as an indicator of risk, and that's it. We don't have at this point in time, like I say, a published risk rating around all of those around those projects, nor do we have a breakdown of the values associated with that.
Okay.
Very quick follow. So thank you very much for identifying the voluntary redundancy scheme as one of the specific things around these capital receipts. We can't borrow for that. I understand that now. I just think I just wonder why we're being so coy. You know, what are the capital projects? Presumably it's the North West Road, and presumably, but I'm wondering if there's anything else at that scale. Is there a specific project to do with this building, for example, which is risky, which is in the works? I just think, you know, this is the scrutiny committee, and people might be listening. They'd quite like to know which projects it is that are potentially at risk or causing risk to the council.
So just to be clear, through your chair, we're not saying that these projects are at risk. We're saying, I mean, the biggest profile, biggest projects that we've got at the moment are North West Road, Riverside, Whitchurch, Oswestry. They're the big areas. We are not suggesting that those are all at risk. What we are saying is those are big projects, and if any of those fall on revenue, we need to flag that. So it may be it's high impact, low likelihood, but nevertheless, we're flagging it.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to Roger now and then back to Tony. All right, Roger.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. On page 19 is a figure 2, which looks at the Better Care Fund. And you say in your report, for a number of years, it's been cash flat. That's why you've taken the money from. On page 21 is figure 3. And there are some funding there which I query, because as the chairman said, you can only deal in facts. However, you have thought that the pay inflation, which was assumed at 3%, will drop to 2.5%. And I presume that's a saving of £750,000 there. So is that a fact that you know is going to be 2.5%? Because if it isn't, that risk is still there and should be in the budget. And I notice about the Rural Services Delivery Grant, is that still in place for 25-26, or is that finishing? Because there are 3 monetary values in the movement. Can we just hear what those 3 movements are? As well as I say, the question about the Better Care Fund.
Well, where did you get percentage from, Roger? I can't see that report.
Which?
The 3%.
It's on page 20. It says at the top, inflation. Pay inflation was assumed at 3%.
Okay.
And then it says 2.5% at the side. Given the payoff for being lower than had been originally anticipated, which I thought had been turned down. Maybe I'm wrong. So the assumption's being 2.5%. Now, that is an assumption, not a fact, but we are building it in to the 25-26 movement of expenditure, that saving. I just wondered why that is there when it's only estimated that may well happen. I don't know if it will or not.
Okay. James, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Chair. So I mean, you're both right. Of course, we deal in facts. However, an assumption can't be a fact. It's based on the information that we have across the country. We've spoken to other local authorities. We know with the position around the pay offer, and we know that we have indications of the likelihood of that eventually being accepted, and on the basis of the balance of information that we have, we believe that the 3% that we built in where is not going to be necessary for 4-5, and therefore we've reduced that down to 2.5% for the 4-5 year. That then has an impact for later years because obviously your base has gone down for any further increases in future years. So that could possibly turn out to be wrong. It could be a completely different figure at the end of it. Possible, but based on the best information that we have to be in line with other organisations, we've changed that from 3% to 2.5. In terms of the assumptions around better care funding and cash flat, again we're working on the best information that we have and indications of what others are building in terms of those assumptions. The changes, the 3 changes that are shown in figure 3, that movement, the one around specific grant changes between years, specific grants continually move. They're made up of some very small figures and some very large figures. They are constantly moving, and the way in which specific grants are generally treated, certainly in that category, is if there is a grant for 12 months to fund a particular initiative, then that will go in automatically because that grant then is for 12 months. It gets taken out the following year. So if it was £100,000 grant in 3-4 for 12 months, then that will go in as growth in 3-4, and then it will come back out again in 4-5. And there's nothing more than that. It's just literally there will be grants that come in and grants that go out, publications, notifications, whatever it might be that come through, and we just adjust those figures. And it has no impact in the sense that if there's staff involved, for example, a member of staff will be taken on for that 12-month period to manage that grant, and everybody knows from the start that at the end of that 12 months the grant isn't there, and so that fixed term contract will come to an end. So that's the way that that's managed. In terms of the contribution to the general fund, which is the third one, so this is making an assumption that there will be a reduction in the base budget figure, which is of £1.2 million compared to what was built in. That will just be a rounding in terms of the assumptions that are made elsewhere within the budget. So where there have been adjustments that have been made, then to balance those off, there will be adjustment against the contribution to the general fund. So that minor figure is just to reduce the base budget assumption that's built in.
Last one.
Yeah, go on then.
Last one. So were these known in February, or have they only become known since the council set its February budget?
Through you, Chair,
Yeah.
by definition, they've been identified since February.
Okay, you happy, Roger? Okay, so Tony, you want to come back?
I'm okay now, thanks.
You're okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so
Sorry, very quickly, if I may, Chair. Just to clarify the point I just made to Councillor Evans, these are assumptions for 5-6.
Yeah.
This is early indication of these changes. These will be built in to the MTFS that will be approved by council in February for 5-6.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondered whether there was a point in there around the fact that the contribution to general fund is over the limit that cabinet can approve. That's not an issue because this is an indication of the next year, which will be approved before we get.
So we are dealing with next year. Yeah. Okay, Rosemary.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from something that Councillor Evans said, when we look at the timetable for the MTFS, we've got period 2 today, for the current year, and then period 3 comes out soon, period 4, period 5. Is there no intention to show those monthly reports to councillors in the meantime? Obviously, we've discussed the fact that we don't have a T&I scrutiny meeting until September, but given that this is a sort of really critical time and these are sort of temperature taking reports, I think it would be good for councillors to have access to them as they are presented or prepared.
Yes.
So very quickly for you, Chair. The reason that we've set that timetable out in the way that we have, the monthly reporting for the period reporting is all set out on the forward plan because there's a cabinet forward plan. So all of those and the dates at which those will be available to cabinet are set out there. As the chair alluded to, where we have scrutiny meetings, transformation and improvement scrutiny overview and scrutiny committee meetings before cabinet. The assumption is that those will go there. However, there is there is no reason why scrutiny committees can't see other periodic monitoring reports if they happen before. So if the period 5 was going at some point in the future, but it was already available and scrutiny met at that point, there's no reason why scrutiny couldn't see that period 5 even if it wasn't going to go to cabinet for 2 months, simply because of the way the cabinet timetable falls. So that's why we set out when those will be available, and scrutiny can then take from that what they want. But cabinet is already set out in the forecast.
Yeah, so we will see period 4 before cabinet on the 9th of September.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Right, thank you. So unless anybody's got anything else to say, I'd just like to thank James and Gwilym for their report. And if we note this report, I think that's the only thing we can do. Is everyone happy with that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So item number 7 is the financial monitoring period 2. So who would like to introduce this? We give Ben something to do, or do you want to do it?
I'll say a few words if I may, just
Yeah, John and Gwilym, yeah.
Then I'll James carry on. I think we've already stated the process of this previously in the meeting, and this is obviously early doors following the financial outturn that was finished at the end of May. This again is a very quick briefing of seeing it as we've seen it in month 2. Not all the information has come together, and again it's painting that picture so we have as much time as possible to be reactionary or to get us back on track if needed. So I think I'll let the officers explain it in more detail. Thank you.
Okay, James, would you like to go, or Ben, or a bit both, or you start off?
Well, so I'll give a very brief introduction, and then Ben can join in as necessary. So the only reason I wanted to just go in briefly is just to reiterate, this is at period 2. So this is at the end of May.
Yeah.
This is very, very early in the financial year.
Yeah.
The financial team that are involved in pulling this together would normally be spending April and May purely focused on closing down the accounts for the previous year. They did do that. They closed the accounts down and we produced our statement of accounts by the end of May. At the same time, we were preparing for the period 2, and that's been produced and is available today. It would have been available earlier, but obviously we moved the cabinet date around, so that's why this has come slightly later than it would have otherwise done. It's very early in the year, so that means 2 things. One, the information on which it's based is early information. There's only 2 months of information there on which to project going forward, and secondly, there are still 10 months remaining after these projections have been made. There's a lot of time for those projections to move one way or another over the rest of the financial year. So with that caveat, happy for Ben to identify anything.
Okay, thank you. Ben, do you want to say a few words, or shall I get some questions for you to answer first?
Just a couple of quick points, Chair, if I may. I think it's worth pointing to the points A to G at 2.2, which sets out a set of risks that we're paying very close attention to as we go through the year. So that's kind of informing our risk outlook around a lot of this. There's some key actions that have been taken since period 1, set out at 2.3, and some planned actions set out at 2.4 around sort of how we're approaching all of that. I think lastly, I would say that the appendices, the detail shown at Appendix 1 gives a high-level view of the current forecast as at period 2, bearing in mind the caveat that James has just expressed around this is still very early in the year. So the current forecast as at period 2 is set out in Appendix 1 and is also compared with those savings where we're looking for further detail around delivery. The important point I think to set out there is that the correspondence between the overall variance being set out at period 2 for the whole budget, and the values being set against the savings where we need to do some further work to have confidence in delivery. That's a very similar set of numbers. The point of highlighting that is that we're not seeing significant variances at this stage in the year anywhere else. It's simply to do with savings delivery, which, to be honest, is what I would expect at this point. But hopefully that provides some detail within that document and gives some kind of indication as to the overall approach that's being taken at the moment. But thank you, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. So, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I do recognise 2.4 where the word urgent appears several times, which to try and improve the situation. But can I turn to page 5 in 7.2 and look at that current position that's there? Item 1 on delivery, under delivery, £24 million. Net pressure £3 million. And then there's a £38 million there, where together indicates a forecast £38 million overspend. And there are some other points later on in the agenda, but just ask to explain that table and where we are. Has urgent work been carried out so those figures are now altered, or are those what we're looking at and they are being taken forward?
Okay, so shall I ask Ben, or do you want to answer that one, James?
I'll take it if you want.
Yeah, okay.
A fairly quick answer. In terms of the 7 areas, the A to G that were identified by Ben earlier, this is the financial analysis of those areas and risks. So the 24.1 relates to in-year savings that have not been delivered out of the 62.5. That's the risk associated with those. In terms of those variances around demand in adults and children's, at the moment there's an indication of around about 3 million, so very little. And then in terms of other unforeseen budget pressures, which can include those savings that were undelivered and brought forward into this current financial year, that's 11.4. So those 3 things together, covering the entirety of the revenue position, shows a variance of 38.5 million. That's the total. In terms of the capital external factors, the project risks and the cash flow, there are no elements of that are built into the 38.5 overspend at this point in time. So, and the breakdown of that 38.5 is shown in that table in period in section 3 of that table, and that's the first appendix which shows where that is in a little bit more detail across those directories. So the assumption is correct. The council says.
Okay. So this might be a stupid question. I'll let you go. The corporate budget's the £7.8 million. What's that?
In terms of the corporate budgets, what we have is we have the various directorates, and then the corporate budgets is the kind of the everything else. Often that is a big minus number. And in terms of the current budget, it's showing a minus £16 million. The reason that's a big minus is because where there are budgets grants generally that are applied, if those grants coming in are not specific to a particular directorate, they sit in that corporate. So you have, and also there tends to be things like organisational wide savings targets and stuff there as well. So it tends to build up some quite big negative numbers. The reason that there is a variance of 7.9 million shown against there is predominantly around organisational wide savings, which are being delivered organisational wide, for which they are currently rank rated as red or amber. So in this case, it will be red in the majority of cases. So it means that rather than trying to allocate every saving out to every directorate, some things you just have to hold centrally, and then they are managed and delivered over the year.
So you would expect, I mean, you would expect that 7.9 million to drastically reduce as the quarters tip up. Okay. Sorry, Roger. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can go forward and look at the Appendix 1, which you referred to, projected revenue extra and by service there. There are some there which says the, and I'll just concentrate on place. When it says commercial services, and I find it surprising there's no reference about PwC in this. Because if we look at the report which is going to council, it says that scrutiny will be kept up to date with what PwC are doing. But I can't find anything in this. But I do note that the current estimate £3 million shortfall in green waste changes, £1.5 million shortfall in waste PFI contract renegotiation due to delays in identifying negotiating strategy. It was a specific area that PwC will bring an experience in and going to help renegotiate that contract with Veolia. But there's a difference there of £4.5 million all together. So is that a failure by the council, PwC, or a combination?
There you go, James.
Okay, so in terms of, I'm just trying to think, there's something about your first point I was going to raise. What's your first point? Sorry.
First.
It's about,
yeah, it was about that, and I meant to add on that I can see no reference about the extra savings, which is going. Sorry, the extra saving which is going to have to be, and I'll put it in with this because of the over the increase in expenditure which is anticipated this year, which is being looked after by the increase in savings by reductions in staff numbers to 540 now, which either in this one or a later one says that that figure of 540 is not really known because of factors which are now being considered. So 350 is now the base and 540 is a variable figure. But I can see no reference in there about that saving and the extra cost that's being incurred this year in the delivery of services, which has caused the increase in the number of staff reductions that are needed to be made. And I've tried to phrase that very carefully because I understand that if I was a member of staff, I would be concerned.
Yeah, that's a different question to the first two.
It's still,
Yeah.
it's still part of the financial monitoring period too.
So another question, James, which is related to what Roger's saying. So we've got the 3 million shortfall in the waste. However, if we do start charging from October, but people can start paying from August, okay, the service will be from August to August or October to October. So whatever monies you get in, will you split the monies between the two financial years? You'll split it pro rata, will you, on the months? Yeah. So there won't actually be, depending on how much you get in, you can't estimate that, won't actually be 3 million. There'll be a significant reduction in that because of you're introducing the charges from October, but you can pay from August. Is that right?
So if I pick up on that one specifically, then I'll come back and I've also remembered the point that I wanted to make. So I'm going to cover it all off. So very, very simply, if we use nice simple numbers like £4 million income to come from green waste, so it's £4 million savings target. If that's introduced on the 1st of October, and charges then applied from the 1st of October, that would be 6 months of the year.
Yeah.
So let's assume that the assumptions that were made around the take up, etc., are all perfect, and we end up with £4 million coming in between the 1st of October and the preceding the weeks after that. £4 million comes in. Only 2 million of that can be applied to this financial year, and the £2 million would then be applied to the start of the next financial year. So although we would have received in 4 million, and although we would have delivered that savings target in its widest sense, because of the way we have to account for it, part of that 6 months of that service will actually apply to the 24 25, 26.
26, yes.
So we would only be able to count 2 million of that. So the assumption that's made in here at the moment is that there'll be a £3 million shortfall on green waste. That's a very prudent assumption based on charges not actually applying until 1st of January. Okay, so if it's 1st of October, then actually that, and the figures were right, then that figure would be significantly higher. In terms of the other points, that you mentioned about the PVC update, there wasn't any mention of the PVC update. The reason is the same as the reason I'm going to give for the majority of your answer, is that what you have to remember, and this is unfortunate, and if there was a different way of doing it, I would, but there isn't. The period 2 is information as at the end of May, and therefore it has to be, the integrity of that report has to be maintained. So we may know more information, we may know more things that happened in June and happened in July, but we can't build those into the period 2 monitor because they didn't exist at the point that was produced. However, the paper that's later on the agenda around the target operating model doesn't have that restriction. So that's why, if you're looking for what we're doing in terms of PwC, you'll find information in that FOM report. In terms of the implications around staffing reductions, we did not know that information to the level that we are currently being able to talk about reductions in posts. We didn't have that information in May, so it's not in the period 2. Assumptions were made at that point in time around what that would look like, but more information is now available, which is in the TOM report, and that then means that we can build that into the period 3 report, which will then go forward. So it's constantly evolving piece, but we have to maintain the integrity of the periodic reports. Otherwise, it's not period 2; it's just an update as at, based on some information that we picked up, a few days ago. We can't do that. We have to ensure that the mechanisms behind the dashboards, all of that update is what goes into the report. Otherwise, we lose that audit trail. Does that cover?
Yeah, I understand that, Chairman. Can I ask another question?
Yeah, go on.
All right.
Yeah,
in 7.4, it's unlikely that the level of savings being delivered this year will not adversely affect performance. Council's financial position may require reduction, pausing or stopping of services. Public consultations will be undertaken where, for example, short or medium-term decisions require policy change. Will all policy changes go to the Cabinet or before the scrutiny, before they are put in place?
It depends on the value. There you go, James.
So
I'm sorry, Chairman, it says in the Constitution that policy changes are decided by members.
So once again, you're both right. If there is a policy change, then you're absolutely correct. If it's a policy change, then it has to go before members to make that, and there will be a decision about where that goes, and that decision could be based on value, so it could have to go to council. If, however, there is just a change that just has a financial value, then that is a decision that will be taken either by officers or by members as necessary. The thing to remember is a lot of those financial decisions have already been taken by council approving the budget for 24-25. So if there's a saving that's been identified that could be £10 million, if that's been identified and approved by council, officers then go off and deliver that. If as part of the delivery of that, there is a change in policy, which it is believed is an actual change in policy, which therefore needs member approval, then that would then come back for that change. What won't come back is a change in terms of that £10 million in that example, because that's already been approved by council. You don't need to then reinforce that approval, if that makes sense.
Okay, right. Rob.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Just got a quick question really around 2.2b. It says demand and social care is higher than budgeted. Seems to almost be the same old story year after year. And I'm wondering whether we need to sometimes revisit our assumptions for future years. because we just seem to be sort of saying the same thing year after year. So I think on from that, I'd just like to know, well, what's driving these increases in social care, and what actions have been taken to bring these in-year costs under common control.
So, through you, Chair, and Ben may want to come in to provide a little bit more detail around this. He's much closer to it than I am in terms of the mechanics. So just to start with, to reassure people, we've identified this as a risk. What we haven't done, we're not flagging it as a problem. We identify it as a risk. And the reason I'm making that distinction is for exactly the point that you've made. We saw last year that within social care, within adults and children's social care, the delivery of savings was actually spot on. Of the £21 million, I think it was, of savings to be delivered within adults and children's, that's pretty much delivered to the penny. However, in terms of the management of overall demand, that's where we saw an overspend. And what we did last year was we built in an assumption, we flagged it really early, that £20.5 million would need to go in to help cover the cost of that demand within adults and children's. What we also said as part of that is that would be based on a model being built that we would be able to look at in terms of future years. So when we moved into, and Ben will know the numbers, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but when we moved into the 24-25 financial year, there was something like £28 million, £17 million for children's that was built in as growth for adults and children. So significant growth was built in to this current financial year purely to manage the point that you're making. Because what we couldn't have is constantly being on catch-up. Straight away, there's an overspend. So the positive point here is that, as indicated in the table further down, there is currently so in point 7.2 against that second point. It says there's several variances around social care commission services over a period two, the net total of £3 million. That £3 million is in children's services predominantly. The much bigger budget of adults, we are not seeing those levels of variances at this point in time. So we're seeing pretty much balanced on adults and an early indication of an overspend within children's. So that's how we're managing it, but the growth has been built in, and that's been then reflected in future years so that we have a better idea that we're managing it. But Ben is working with the service at the moment to help identify a much more detailed and granular model to update the position for next year and beyond in a much more accurate way. Take that if you want.
Yeah. Ben, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Chair. James, absolutely correct. We're looking at that in more detail. I think it's worth making sure the committee are aware that the forecast for social care demand is looked at in quite a high level of detail each month. So each month as we report, we check through how things are changing based on the budget assumptions and comparing them back against the assumptions. At the moment, some of what we're seeing is that in the children's world, prices seem to be broadly in line with what was expected, but activity is higher than was expected. By contrast, in the adults world, what we're seeing is that some of the activity is lower than was anticipated, but some of the prices are higher than were anticipated. So that sort of begs a number of questions, and we're digging into those. Price in that context is more of a sort of average unit cost, which is a bit unfair when you're dealing with human beings, but that's sort of the way that we need to break it down to understand it. Some of that is to do with perhaps the price in the market for particular packages of care. It can also be to do with the complexity of the care that's brought forward or is required by a child or an adult. Sometimes it's to do with the increasing or the changes in the way in which social care practice is working through. We do a much more detailed piece of work than that, which is what we do each month. We do that every year as part of budget setting, and we use that to update the outlook across the course of the MTFS. So it would be a mistake for any of the councillors to form the view that this is something that we do once and then it kind of sits there and we check back against it periodically. This is a moving piece, and we look at it at least monthly. We're also looking at it annually as part of the MTFS planning process. And within that, what we're trying to do is to incorporate the many changes in practice that we're seeing, because there was changes to the practice during COVID, before COVID, after COVID, etc., etc. So we're working through all of that in quite a lot of detail. That's helping us to do the forecasts, and that's the review that I'm undertaking, particularly linking in with James around this, because we need to understand what that growth pressure is looking like across the medium term. So that's sort of the outline of it. Happy to answer more questions as appropriate, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Tom?
I was really interested in right, here we go. I was really interested in listening to what's just been said, and I was actually waiting for the growth figure, but it never actually came. The growth figure that's been built in. Can we have that, please? And going on from what Rob said, the difficulties seem to crop up annually, but they seem to crop up later in the year, sort of in the autumn and the winter. And the jury's out, obviously, until we get there this year as to whether we've got problems or whether the growth figure is on the right assumption. So please, what is the growth figure?
There you go, Ben.
Thank you for that question, and I will look it up in a moment, but I do know that it was included in some detail, broken down across a number of budget lines within the MTFS document, which was agreed by Council in February. So the key value is within that. I can strip that out and share it via Tom across to the committee, so that you've got sight of it. It is there in the documentation that's already been in front of councillors, however. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and just while you're doing all that, it'd be interesting to see, because obviously the demographics are getting, we're getting older and older in Shropshire, just to see if the demand relates to the increase in the age profile of the county. Thank you. Okay, so I think, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just looking at Appendix 2 to this report, which is where we're looking to get towards the £38 million in further savings that we need to do. By far the biggest proportion is the 12.4 million in RC086 efficiency savings across all areas of the council, including paying attention to secure and reduce carbon emissions. Now, I know that a lot of that is in the next agenda item, the new operating model. But is there any indication just as to how we're likely to achieve that 12.4 million?
So, if I may, Chair?
Yeah, I'm just looking for that.
Okay, so if you look on page 14 of the report, it's probably about halfway down.
Okay.
And it just says, as was said, RC 086 efficiency savings across all areas of the council. Now, so this is where there was a specific piece of work around that we're doing with PwC around third-party spend. And so a review is being undertaken around that. At the moment, that is in infancy, so it's just started work around the areas that could be looked at across the organisation. There are a number of levels to that review. So part of it will be, are there just changes that we can make to existing contracts? Are there just things that we can stop paying for, expenditure that we can prevent going through? That's at the one extreme. Right at the other extreme is a complete redesign and recommissioning of the sorts of things, the sorts of outcomes that we're looking for as an organisation. So there may be half a dozen contracts that all deliver slightly different things, pulling those apart, looking at the way in which we would commission the outcomes that we're trying to achieve across those, and then setting up a new contract around that. Could be, and that could be make or buy as well. It could be a contract, it could be something that we deliver in-house. It's a completely different way of reviewing that. That's a big number associated with that. So there's going to need to be some big initiatives within that. The question will be, can those big initiatives be delivered within the timescales that we're talking about? So at this point in time, as you can see in that appendix, the whole of the 12.4 is flagged against the red because that work has only just begun. And in terms of those big ticket items, the assumption at this point in time is we won't be able to deliver those to the degree to that value before the end of this financial year. So to be prudent, the whole thing is red.
Thank you.
Okay, Tony. Right here.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 6 of the report, under 7.3, the statements made. However, some of the overarching savings previously considered as indicative deliverable have now been reassessed, and some will be undeliverable in the current term. The assessment of period 2 is a gap of 24.1 million, which will need urgent action to address, at least in part. Is there any update on that? Because as I read that, it's saying 24 million is at the end of period 2, not expected to be delivered during this current financial year. Is that correct?
Yeah. So yeah, the 24.1 that's identified there correlates exactly to the figure, the table there in 7.6, which shows 24.077 flagged as red, and that then in the table that we were just referring to, it's the same figure again there in the red. So as at period 2, the level of non-delivery of the £62.5 million identified was 24.1. So that's the position as at period 2. The period 3 position is currently being worked on. In all honesty, that figure could get better or that figure could get worse. The reality is, as each period goes by, you have more robust information. So the information gets better. It doesn't mean that the answer you get is better. The answer might be significantly worse, but the information it's based on is more robust and better from that point of view. So given that it's period 2, there will be assumptions that have been made on those areas. So going back to the example we just talked about, the whole of the 12.4 is flagged as red in that one level. That will not be all red by the end of the year. Some of that will be delivered. The question is, how much of that will move out of the red into the amber and into the green? By the same token, some things that are currently flagged, well, if they're in green, they're delivered. But if they're in amber, they may then flip into red as we move throughout the year. So it is a movable feast. I can't give you an update on where we were from period 2 because we're currently working through period 3. Period 3 is at the end of June and it's only the 15th of July now. So we're only just working through that information as we speak.
Okay. Right then. So what I propose to do now is, if everyone's in agreement, is to actually note this report and move on to the Tom, because I think there'll be people with a lot of questions on that. Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. So, council new target operating model. Tom. So we haven't heard from Andy yet, so I think perhaps we ought to give him a bit of a turn. So Andy, would you like to introduce the report?
Great, thank you. So in terms of the target operating model, this, if I can just start with a bit of an explanation really around the title. Target operating model vocabulary came from getting leadership right, and the whole work we did, I guess, over the preceding 2 to 3 years of work with some 300 of our most senior staff within the organisation, and we talked about how we develop a strategy, how we enact that, how we change culture of the organisation, and part of that was how do we describe a target operating model. That's basically how the council of the future will work. So we want to use this paper really to make a step change in that vocabulary and kind of stop using the term target operating model, because I just think it's important that we talk about basically in plain English what it means, and it means what the council is going to look like in the future. The other important point about this model and the way that the council is going to operate in the future, this will not happen on a Monday morning in the future. There will not be a whistle and we will suddenly start to operate in this way. This is the result of all those work streams, a result of our transformation work collectively. And this really The model I'm going to talk through in a second, the diagram on the screen that I hope everybody can see, I'll talk through in a moment, and that just starts to describe the principles on which we're going to operate, the principles on which the council of the future will be built. The other important point around this is again, the past couple of papers and our concentration has been twofold. One is around how we deliver financial survivability in this financial year, and that's got to be our primary objective as an organisation. We're not out of the woods. There's huge challenges throughout this financial year, as you are aware of, and everything that we've talked about is what we put in place to manage that. So we can't escape the primary objective of making this organisation financially survivable. At the same time, we've got to understand that life goes on beyond this financial year, and we've got to describe what the organisation in the future may look like and how it will operate. What we can't do is ask this organisation to continue as it's always done. We'll just remove a significant proportion of its budget. We'll remove a number of staff from the establishment. So we cannot turn around and say, look, let's carry on doing what we've always done, just with fewer people, fewer resources, fewer money. That's just not going to be possible. So this really starts to describe fundamental change in the way that we look at this organisation and the way it operates. Again, this is the output of a number of work streams within the transformation programme. With your indulgence, if I can talk through this, if this is the first time you've seen this diagram, then I admit it looks a little complicated. So if I can just try and step through it, hopefully that will help. So if I start at the bottom line there of that diagram, you'll see that Cabinet and Council committees and local members are that foundation of this model. And I think that's really important to note, that whilst at the centre of the organisation that you've got the administration and full council making decisions around policy, it's important that that process is recognised through a number of different committees, but that the whole thing pivots on dependency of local members. So local councillors who make up this council as a whole, and as I say, define policy, but we've really got to leverage the capability and understand that they are our connection with local communities, local place, and it's that two-way flow of information to and from communities and localities that will be essential in informing, I guess, how this organisation will work in the future. The concentric rings underneath there just describe in the broadest sense those core functions. You've got strategic services in the middle, which I think is fairly explanatory. That's how we convert policy into strategy and then delivery. The enabling services, for clarity, are those services that make the machinery of the organisation work, whether it's finances, whether it's HR, those kind of internally operating services. And then the larger grey circle there is actual service delivery. And that's the critical piece around understanding how services will be delivered in the future. So in terms of how that's going to be delivered, let me talk about the outside circles now and start at the top of the diagram, if I could. So again, an important point to note is that this plan is based on the Shropshire plan that was created, again, going back some 3 years now, but this is a continuation of that plan. It was built on those 4 healthies that you can see there: healthy environment, healthy organisation, healthy economy. This clearly talks about how we create a healthy organisation. So that's the point of this. So these circles now, the light coloured sort of yellows and beige at the top there, is how people are going to interact with the organisation. And it starts with something called pre-front door community hubs. Pre-front door is really important. We've said for a long time that we need to move into early intervention and prevention and manage demand in a much more effective way. Experience tells us that if we meet demand earlier and support people with what they need much earlier, it saves them coming into more costly acute type services for the organisation. So getting that right is really important. There are a number of initiatives based on localities and those development of community hubs where we can work with the community voluntary sector, other partners, again, in localities to provide the kind of support, low-level support, that can help a large number of people. The rest then is when we talk about our own organisation now, and that's got to be based on digitisation and automation in the same way as nearly every other organisation in the world is now starting to, certainly any public-facing organisation, is starting to be constructed. So it'll be digital first, and once that low-level pre-front door work has been passed, the next stage will be that digital self-service. So this will be around how can people interact with us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when they want to, and they'll do it hopefully online through direct phone conversations, but the majority of that should be automated. This is about how much of that long list of transactional activity that people have traditionally interacted with us, how do we automate that? How do we create that much more fluid, much more simple response? People get the information they need earlier and quicker and can do it when they want. So again, reiterating that should be through digital channels. But again, can I just explain that it's not just online directly in what we might describe as online forms. This will be much more around chatbots, around being able to interact with AI in a very different way. So again, people who are not as au fait as using a keyboard perhaps or online can actually speak. So this is about voice recognition and having an interactive conversation, albeit automated at that stage. The next level past that is supporting general inquiries. So when you've exhausted that or we've not got the resolution you want, then there will be in effect a triage type service where you can speak to people who will have a more nuanced understanding of the organisation and help to direct you or perhaps help to resolve your problem much easier through just a basic conversation. The next circle then is beyond there, is when you really need our expert support. And that's moving into particularly some of those areas that you can see there. Adults and children's particularly might be an easy example of that, but it's where you get through to knowledge and expertise that you require to provide the support that you need at that point. So there are different elements of this, but the idea is that the high volume, transactional, more easy interface is done exclusively digitally. People who struggle with that will still have the ability to interact with our organisation. And as a matter of assurance, you can go directly to that expert support should you need it in the way that you already can with those kind of services that have that sort of professional expert response. Can I pause there because I think there's a lot of information in that diagram. I've tried to cover a lot of bases there, and I appreciate that. I think that there are a number of elements that perhaps are more obvious and some that are less obvious. So perhaps I'll pause for some questions at that point.
And can I just say, take the questions? I think there's a lot of detail that you don't know, because I think this is an evolving phase. Yeah.
Yes.
But those is sort of the theory bit, I suppose, if you like. Joyce, you want to ask a question?
Within this new model, will the council still be selling services? For instance, we do HR at the moment and planning. I don't know if they're profitable or not. Or will we be more insular? Will we draw in our tentacles?
In response to that, I think the key question there is if they're profitable or not. So if we are generating profit, if they are a tradable, commercially tradable service, then yeah, we would continue to do that. All those services are subject to review at the moment to make sure that they are or they aren't. We'll make a decision based on that.
Yes, and may I come back?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I hope as members, if any are withdrawn, that we'll be told.
Absolutely, I do go back to the bottom of there, and that's trying to really make it clear to the organisation as a whole the foundation of members' engagement. That's the point of that.
Okay, thank you. Rosemary.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. it gets a bit better, doesn't it, that diagram, when you see it more? Not very much. I think as a geologist, you know, diagrams like that all the time. As far as hubs are, excuse me, as far as hubs are concerned, are we looking at providing more hubs within our communities? Is that going to be rolled out? For example, how many we run at the moment? What proportion of our Salopians use those, and so on and so forth? And how do you see that increasing?
Yeah, at this stage, I can't give you a definitive answer to that in terms of yes, there'll be more, yes, there'll be less. But what's important is all that work is underway at the moment to understand what's appropriate in different localities. So some people can recognise a hub as being quite a grand place where we've got perhaps health services, social care, and other more formal arrangements. I think there are other hubs that are far less formal than that, but will work for particular localities. So this is the work that Rachel Robinson particularly is leading on, and it's what makes sense in different areas, what's required in different areas. So all this is in train, but it is a critical element of this, because I think having that level of interaction in those localities is going to be beneficial for individuals and beneficial for the organisation. But I think it's horses for courses, and we're trying to design it on the hoof at the moment.
Yeah. And can I just add that we had a very interesting meeting last week, the people, about the very same thing. And what we were talking about was trying to actually retain our social workers, and actually the importance from, it was an HR report, the importance of having these hubs both for our clients and for the social workers and people that are helping them. And I think there's a realisation actually that in a rural county like this, actually, it's probably the way to go. And when we dug down a bit further, actually I was heartened to hear that we've got quite a lot of hubs, you know, that are either working now or in train across the county. And I think it's a thing that we can actually do quite agilely, because they don't need to be that big. So that bit I'm really pleased about, and I think the rural people probably pleased as well. Gwilym, and then Julian wants to say something. Julian,
from my perspective, where the hubs go, obviously leading on the voluntary community sector. And I talked to them about the implications of this and the MTFS on a regular basis. I think we don't need to get hung up that we are the owner of the hub, because in a lot of places those hubs are already in existence, and perhaps we just need to participate with them. I take to say that the Mayfair Centre in Church Stretton is a good example.
Yeah.
The Clibby Country Centre in my part of the world, Enterprise House in Bishop's Castle. We just could be part of those hubs if we need to, if the demand is there and the citizens want it. Yeah. So I think it may be something I'll take back to Rachel, and we just need to have a bigger map of what's actually in the county, irrespective of ownership.
Yeah, when we drill down with the members, certainly, you know, all these places are coming at us left, right, and centre. So I've got Tom, then Julian, and then Rosemary, and then Tony.
Okay, I've got a number of quite brief points. The first thing is the bottom left-hand bit where it says customer management. I don't like the tone of that. I think it should be customer service. We're here to serve the public of Shropshire. We're not here to manage them. I'm delighted that local members are at the centre of things as a direct communication. Now, the one thing I would ask, and this is very relevant for the head of paid service, is I hope in future, and we all find this as a problem, whether it's cross-party, but very often you email an officer, and frankly, you just don't get a reply. You chase up and you chase up and you chase up. I go for about 3 months, and I really, at that stage, you've lost the will to live. But I think it's an issue, and I lots of nods going on, and I think that really wants to go home. That in this restructuring, we need contact with officers so we can actually function, do our job, do our casework. Hubs, absolutely ideal. Temporarily, Whitchurch, where Peggy and I represent, we have no hub at all. We have no library, we have no civic centre, we have absolutely nothing. So the only way if you can contact online, but the vast majority of people actually would have to still phone in. And the other thing I am really concerned about, and I have sort of mentioned it at council in the past, particularly with sort of applications for things like blue badges, and you probably remember that debate, Roger, maybe not, but I'm really concerned that 20% of the population of Shropshire don't have access to the internet, and I'm really concerned that 20%, particularly older people, people with disabilities, for instance, as well, let's not forget them, are in effect disenfranchised. So they do need telephone access. They do need access via local members, for instance, to actually get into the system. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. So have you got a fire station in?
We have a fire station
because
in
the fire authority are actually full partners in this. So I think there are conversations.
It's unmanned.
It's unmanned, exactly. So there's room there, and that was one of the things that they said. If you've got, the fire service, the NHS, all these things, they can all be used. Anyway, so Gwilym, did you want to interrupt or do you want to
just very briefly? The work we do, I'm a part of with Rachel Robinson and other partners is about digital exclusion. And we do a really big piece on that. And we've got the likes of Age UK, DWP and everybody else coming on board to help provide that solution. So.
Okay, so I've got Julian's next.
Thanks. I suppose to get some confidence about this, it would be really helpful to have a bit of a touch and feel and hands-on experience of what some of this means. So, for example, there's no, as far as I know, there's no hub in my area, which is perfect, which may well be perfectly fine. I'm not arguing that there's suddenly I'm going to not suddenly demand a hub, but I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it feels like. I think that would be really valuable for me to have confidence in this model. Similarly with the automation, actually, I don't, and actually on that, addressing Tom's point, I don't actually necessarily feel that I do have to be able to email officers if the automation is working. If I can also use the automation, it's working. But I'm not yet confident about that, and I haven't had experience of it. So I think we need to sort of be experiencing what all this feels like as it's being rolled out. And then the other thing, I suppose, just looking at this, I mean, Rosemary was concerned about how hard it is to read as a document. And when I read it through, I just, it just felt very abstract. And I get it. I get that you've got to start at that level, but it doesn't even mention directorates. And presumably, the level of automation in one directorate is going to be very different to what you can do in another directorate. So, and so I'm just concerned because that's where the savings will be made, and that's also where the delivery is being made. I'm just concerned that we're not yet seeing something at a directorate level that gives us a sense of that, especially because in previous meetings there has been some variability in the 22 directorates to deliver savings and change, and as long as we've got just one model to impose on everybody, I don't think we're getting the scrutiny view on how different directorates are managing the degree of change that they need to take on and whether it works for all directorates.
Yeah, just one thing though. I think we did have a talk with PwC, and I think what this is trying to illustrate isn't about directorates. It's about communication. So it's about how we communicate with the public. Because when you talk to somebody, they're not interested in what directorate it comes with. To that they want to know how you do it. So in a sense, this is really about communication. Absolutely about communication, I think. So we need to move ourselves away, because I know that we're sort of wedded to these directorates. So I just wanted to make that point. Okay, so do you want to answer that question? Sorry, and then Andy can
just to make a very quick point, as you were taking, what does it feel like during the election period? Customer services on the election calls, ChatGPT actually took 40% of the calls. So you're saying those people who aren't digitalised are phoning up, they're actually talking to a digital. That's just one example.
Yeah, share.
So,
So, yeah, so what about, and then like a little bit more feedback on those questions.
Yeah, Andy, would you like to do?
I'm just wondering whether.
no, I just put my.
Yeah, put your
Little bit in
sixpence
as well,
in, yeah, and then and Rosemary doesn't feel left out because she was before you.
I also have a little bit to add to it.
Okay, we'll have it all, and then Andy can deal with
I
it.
agree with Tom to a
Yeah.
large degree, particularly with regards to those people who within their area may have Wi-Fi access, but they just don't choose to use Wi-Fi. You know, they're of a particular age in many cases who will still need another means of contacting the council. But if we are going to go very much more digitally, then I believe that we need to improve our digital services, because if you look at what people use these at the moment, a lot of people will use Fix My Street, and you know that does not work, and people, you know, they're told that the work's been done, and they can quite clearly see that the work hasn't been done, and that leads then to further contact with the council and officers. What's going on here? You know, it's not working. So we need to sort of look at the systems we're offering and make sure that they're going to, you know, hit the mark, I think.
Right, thank you. Rosemary, do you want to add your bit?
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we go back 20 years and think about the furore about post offices closing. I was in West Wales at the weekend and I had to post something urgently, and I thought, oh no, this is going to be a nightmare. But in fact, we came across 3 different post offices that were corners in shops, a basket, one of them was, and so on and so forth. So it's actually very, very easy. But 20 years ago, the idea of closing post offices was a horror to most customers. So I think, you know, the idea of this, underlying it, is perfectly deliverable, but it's about how to deliver it, isn't it, as always?
Yeah.
And I think to add to what Julian and Tonya both said, and also Tom, there are lots of people who are excluded from this digital world, and the phone world, for example, not just because of being in rural areas, it happens to in town seats as well. And it's just about ability, engagement with, and some, you know, not having a smartphone or having a smartphone. But we talked also about Fix My Street. Some time ago, I started to add information to reports that were coming up in my division. So perhaps I had been told about something, I took a couple of photos and made a few notes, and then I added it to the report that someone else had put to say this is actually important because of blah, there's a safety issue here on the road or whatever. And shortly after that, I noticed that Fix My Street no longer allows councillors or anybody else to add something. So I take personal credit for that. But I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I think it would be very helpful if councillors are involved in that, you know, in that sort of way of managing things, so that we can add value rather than just be on the outside of it and be needed to add another report to a system and so on and so forth.
Okay. Right then. Oh, Lottie, we may as well have it. Andy can answer it one day. But you've got pen and paper, Andy. I feel all right.
Thank you, Chairman. Post office closures is still causing horrific problems. In my area, I've got 2 outreaches closings, and in the adjacent area, there's another half a dozen that's post office outreach has ceased to operate, and it's causing a lot of problems in rural areas. But the question I wanted to ask, Chairman, was delivering the financial reality. And it says we believe our initial net estimates are, as I said before, but also the means that we cannot wait for the operating model to be finalised to reduce our costs. So there are efforts to reduce the costs elsewhere. And if one looks on page 17 with the MTFS, it says that the TOM transformation partner, which I presume is PwC, delivers 4 end-to-end processes reviews yielding £0.5 million per project, £2 million. I presume that's PwC. what are those projects? And also, if one looks over the page, RC 080, review and resize overall council staffing beyond those listed elsewhere, £8.5 million. What does that mean? 540 is a minimum, or is that included in that there? Because it says beyond those listed elsewhere.
Okay, Dan wants to ask. Oh, Dan and Joyce, you may as well take them.
It's not actually really a question, Chairman, but I just wanted to make a comment that I think that diagram and the whole report of the plan is actually really good. It's clearly been really well thought out, and I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
I'd like to just add a bit of humour and stick up for Fix My Street, if I may, Claire.
So you haven't been thrown off it then?
No, never. No,
Oh,
no. What I wanted to say is last week I reported on Fix My Street, and actually this is what I put: rude body part painted on highway in fluorescent green. I have to say it was reacted to and it was cleared up the next day. So it works. I won't tell you what the rude body part was.
So anything that needs repairing, it's going.
That's because it was green.
Oh dear, right. Okay. Well, if it's water based, it wouldn't last very long. Right, Andy, do you want to take your list?
Yeah, I'll do my very best. I'm unlikely to cover everything, but I will try my very best. So I take the first point around customer management to customer service. Absolutely. I think your point about local members, and I do hear you in terms of your responses and the issues. It's not just you. Absolutely, let's be realistic about that. But I have got quite a detailed response, and what I might suggest at some point, Chair, is that David Baker's invited here at some point to look at this, because I think it's a very relevant point about the responses. And if we get this digital theme right, then the intention, and I have this from a response from David only yesterday, or over the weekend, should I say, that if we get this right, you will be able to track your email question or your inquiry as to exactly where it's up to, who's looked at it, when you're going to get the detail, and the stuff that I know frustrates members and frustrates the public as well. So that's a major part of this investment, is trying to get that right, because going back to somebody else's point, I think if we don't get it right, it compounds our work and it just frustrates you, and it actually causes money as well. So that's a key issue.
Can I just stop you there a second, Andy? So would everybody be happy if we had that as an agenda item for the next meeting?
Yeah.
Because I think that makes sense. Okay. Right, carry on there. Yeah.
In terms of the percentage of the population that you raise as well, Councillor Biggins, but so does many other people around the table. I think it's important to recognise that yes, there are people who are still digitally excluded. I did say at the start that if you can use the telephone and speak to us, you can still do that. I think the number of people that will find difficulties that will naturally decrease over time. And I think with any other organisation, and Rosemary, I think your point around post offices was well made in the same way. Yeah. I think a few years ago, if we talked about every bank coming off high streets, it would have met with the same kind of response. But actually now many people have much closer relationships with their banks, funnily enough, through digital rather than through high streets. But I do take the point, and the point I'll reinforce is, through all this digitisation and automation, for those people who struggle with that, there will still be a way through and a way to speak to people. The engagement with members, Julie, I think your point about how to get more detail in this, I think the point about the diagram is, at this stage, it would be impossible to make a diagram that makes sense on a single page and get into that level of detail. It is designed to be a very overarching model, and there is far more detail within those directorates. The only thing I'd add to the directorate piece is that I'm trying to look at this organisation in a much more horizontally cross-cutting way, as opposed to trying to get across those silos. So again, just trying to maybe set the scene there a little bit. So I'm just trying to go through this. Talked about hubs and automation. Again, I think there's a set of bullet points that sit alongside this, and it may be worth, if you get a chance, having a look at the there's an automation, an animation attached to this diagram on the intranet with some bullet points as well that probably helps to explain it in a lot more detail. But those bullet points, I think, bring up some of your points that you raised, Gillian. And one of those is stakeholder engagement. One of those is just how members will inform this process. And again, going back to prequel, the David Baker stuff, he was keen to writ large through response to me, look at how he wants to engage with members about how this will work in the future. Not just this, but the whole digital interaction piece. So I think reinforcing the points you make around digital exclusion and the fact that we need to improve digital services to make this work. Absolutely, 100%. Yes, we are investing heavily in that because we believe this will ultimately make a much more efficient organisation. We've got a long way to go, but we're putting money into that to drive improvements really quickly. So absolutely with you on there. And again, I'd reiterate the point about us getting it wrong. I guess in technical speak, that failure demand, we're trying to reduce that because it just irritates people and causes money. I take on board the Fix My Street piece and again, digital exclusion that other people have made. And Roger, I'm going to hand over to James in terms of the technical bit around the finances that you brought up. But I think your point about you raised the issue of not waiting for the model to be finalised. This is being absolutely frank. This is a case of building the aeroplane while we're flying. We're trying to move through a period of transition. We're trying to move through a financial year of survivability, and we must take actions to ensure that. But at the same time, we want to create a sustainable organisation that makes sense to others. So I take your point entirely, and I don't apologise for the comments in there that say it's not finalised. It isn't, and it will be an evolving picture, and I dare say it will evolve again from that particular diagram. But that's what it looks like at the moment, and that's trying our best to communicate an idea and a principle on which the organisation will operate.
If I can, Chairman, just come back on that one. I'm disappointed that this has been there. We have elections in 8 months' time, and there's been no discussion on this, as far as I'm aware, with the opposition groups. It's there, and I understand it's opposition and administration, but I don't know what's going to happen in May. But I would have thought that everybody needs to adopt it. There may be contributions from others which could help it, because we are all interested in keeping the council local.
Couldn't agree more, and that's why this is part of the communication of this has happened over days, not weeks and not months, because this is the point in time when we've been able to set the stall out and talk this through. In terms of the fact that members from any party can contribute to this and make it better, I absolutely welcome that, and indeed hope that will be the case.
And didn't we have a members briefing on it the other week?
It was just last week.
So I think we're all on the same page, really, Roger. I think it's about us all working together.
It was a presentation of it, not in the preparation of it.
Okay, but I don't think we have that luxury of time. William?
Just to pull out Andy's piece, and I'm very much on board with this. This is an evolution. It'll constantly change as we develop. And so the opportunity for any elected members or new elected members come middle of May next year to actually get on board with this and bring new ideas and new partners. It will constantly be evolving. And again, you know, members could come online to this meeting and listen to it if they wanted to and ask those questions. I don't see many of them there.
And the last point, if I can just hand over to James, because I think there's just some things that need clarification around your inquiries, Roger. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, just very quickly, there were two parts that I picked up. So in the table that's been included, which adds up to £28 million, this identifies all of the savings targets identified within the MTFS relating to staffing or which have been identified at least partially towards staffing savings. The reason I just make that point around partially is because the figure there is 28, whereas the saving is 27. So we're just giving you the full entirety of all of those. But take the second point first. This was around the 8.5 million. So RCO 80, review and resize council staffing beyond those listed elsewhere, 8.5 million, third from the bottom on page 19. The reason it says beyond those listed elsewhere is because if you just look at the top of that page, it says RCO 64, review and resize, staffing HROD team. There's 100,000 associated with that. So that is in addition. So the 8.5 million is in addition to that 100,000. But and all of the other figures identified in that table, the point that's being made is that is included within the total, the 28, which is 27 in terms of overall staffing figure, and that is what we're working towards in terms of the resizing work. So there is nothing additional, it's all included in one place. In terms of the figure at the top, which is about the fifth one down, EFF 103, which is the transformation partner for end-to-end processes. Correct, this is PwC. PwC came in and we asked them to look at what can you identify whereby you can reduce our costs by things that you can bring to the table. There are predominantly three things they're bringing to the table. One is around the target operating model and supporting us around that and creating, helping to create the model that you see on the screen. The second part was around the whole digital interface, the customer journey work, all of the stuff that Anna's just been talking about in relation to the way in which we can completely reconfigure the organisation. And the third piece of work was around the third-party spend, which again I've alluded to. So as part of those, those 400 processes is actually fits into 3 projects, and of those 3 projects, that £2 million is allocated across those 3. So some of that will be in the figure, the 27 million around resizing. Some of it will be in third-party spend. Some of it will be around digitalisation. So hopefully that clarifies the picture. The point, we've put aside all of the detail I've just said. The point is that we are ensuring that there is only one receptacle whereby we're making, in this case, staffing reduction savings. So we're focusing on reducing establishment. All of those figures there are included in here for completeness so that we know there is one place that we're going to. There is no additionality, there is no other agenda, there is no other list. Everything is listed as per there, so that we're working to one set of figures.
Rosemary, and Andy's got to go to backbenchers. It starts at 4 o'clock. So if you just briefly ask his question and then he's got to disappear.
Yeah, it was about thinking about the costs of thinking about our staff who are going to pay a heavy price for all of this. So first of all, the voluntary redundancy process has closed, and we're all told that a full-time equivalent of 90 of individuals have accepted and had agreed packages. I'd like to know what the cost is, both in terms of capital and revenue savings for those 90 that are now confirmed. I'd like to ask why that was closed. I understand that it was set open for a period, but given the small number of redundancies that have been agreed and were really pushed for time on this, why we closed? Why can't we just continue that as part of the whole resizing process? And I want to ask about, on behalf of staff, really, to say that we're cutting staff dramatically, but what is happening in terms of our third-party operators and our plans for that? Because it seems to me that the staff are taking a heavier blow than third-party operators, and I worry about that trend because it will mean we have less staff and more third-party operators, and that for me sounds like a lack of accountability. So many millions of Shropshire pounds, Shropshire residents' pounds, being paid for services that won't be monitored as well as they are today, which many of us think is not sufficient.
Yeah, James.
Okay, through you, Chair. So okay, so in terms of the costs, we're finalising those figures now to publish as part of the P3. I would anticipate that we don't have to wait till September to release that information because once we've got that finalised. So the redundancy, the voluntary redundancy programme, we had a cut-off date, literally to be fair to staff, so that we could, at that point, this model didn't exist. We were just literally asking the organisation, are there people currently that would be willing to? Now, the release of this model will give some people some comfort, and some other people will go, actually, this might not be for me. So, absolutely correct. We therefore need to consider, is there another VR programme? The answer to that is yes, there will be another VR programme. The reason we had a cut-off was because we had to be fair to those individuals and say, this is an evolving piece, so we're going to draw a line and then we'll make decisions. Now, the reality of that situation is we've made decisions around 90 individuals. There were over 200, about 200, I think, that applied in total. The majority of the 110 that aren't in that 90, we haven't said no. We've just said we can't yet until we've worked through the detail of the model. So they've indicated they would like to go. Based on the way that we currently configure things, we would go, no, that doesn't work. In some cases, it won't work ever. If you need, 4-to-1 support for a particular in a children's home or something, you can't then make that 3-to-1. You can't make somebody redundant because they just want to go. It has to be 4. The only thing you can do is make a bump redundancy. So, in some cases, we have said no, but in the majority of cases, we haven't yet said no. We've said we will continue to work through the model. And as we work through that, then again, to be fair to staff, before we then start saying we'd like to open up another voluntary redundancy approach, we have to be fair to those that we've deferred answers to and answer them first. So we will do that, and then there will be an open-ended VR programme. So we're not putting a fixed closing date on this. Obviously, it won't go on forever, but we're not saying, right, there'll be another month of this or 2 months. It will be open over probably the majority of this financial year to work our way through other alternative voluntary redundancy approaches. We will we'll report the cost as soon as we can, and that's what we're doing in terms of the VR process. So hopefully that covers off those 2 points. In terms of the third-party spend, so again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of work being done with PwC around this. So it goes from every extreme, from one where we just say, this looks like it's non-essential spend, we can stop it, which is kind of a spending control kind of approach, right the way through to there is a completely different way of reconfiguring this permissioning of this. Again, as I mentioned before, just to make sure that point is clear, I mentioned make or buy. So as part of this, we may reconfigure, we may recommission a different way of delivering an outcome. That doesn't automatically mean that we would then go to the market and buy that. What we may decide to do as part of this is say, actually, there's a different way of achieving that outcome. And that's kind of management speak. But if you think that through, I can only describe it as outcomes. It's not about saying, here is a service or here is a particular contract. It's a what outcome are we trying to achieve for people? And actually, you can deliver that in a completely different way, which might be, bear no relation to the way we're currently contracting. If you do that, then you may well actually decide we could deliver that as an in-house function, or we could deliver that completely in an automated way. We don't need to actually buy something in. We could actually deliver that through volunteers, as opposed to spending money on it ourselves or buying something in. And there's loads and loads of examples of where we've done that over the years and ways we can do that, consider that going forward. So the answer to that third question, yes, there will be changes in terms of third-party spend. Clearly, we spend £400 million roughly on third-party spend and about £160 million on staff. If your staffing bill is going down, it doesn't automatically mean that your third-party spend will go up. The reality is that both of those need to come down, and actually there'll be a switch between the two. So you could, in theory, actually see your staffing going back up because you actually reduced what's being contracted in going forward. That's not going to happen overnight. but that is something that is part of that model going forward.
Yeah, because there's, because there's 13 million going to come off third party spend. Yeah, and then Roger wants to just ask something.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, well, James, please. So the 27 million we said roughly, that's 540 full-time equivalent staff who will be leaving beyond the 90 already agreed, and an average of 50,000 at cost. And I know that's separated over revenue and capital, isn't it? Cost, is that right, or is that just revenue?
So
Sorry, and the main part of the question, sorry, just said what I was trying to say. Does that calculate for example, older staff who might be being made redundant and also effectively retiring early, which I think will cost us more on pension, from my understanding. I may be wrong about that.
There you go, James. Yeah.
Okay, so trying to pick up all of those areas. When staff reach retirement age, then there is no cost because they will then pick up their pension.
Yeah.
If somebody retires over the age of 55, but before their retirement age, then what happens is that because they are, if they're made redundant, they get access to full benefits. The pension fund can't afford to pay those full benefits because somebody goes at 55 and they're supposed to retire at 65, let's just say, they're expecting to get 10 years payments in. So because the employer, in this case the Shropshire Council, we're bearing in mind pension fund, Telford Region Council, local schools, all sorts of different employers, Shropshire Council is required to pay the equivalent of those 10 years of contributions that would have been paid had they retired at the date that everybody assumed that they would retire. So that's called the pension strain, and that has to go in. So if somebody is 55 and retires, or is given voluntary redundancy, that's the most expensive it can be. By the time they're 56, 57, 58, as they get older, they're paying more contributions in, so the impact on the pension plan is lower. So what you really don't want from a Section 151 point of view, but from a financial point of view, what I don't want is loads of people going at 55, because that's the most expensive it can be. If they're 54 3/4, there's no pension cost at all. You can make your own mind up about whether people will apply for voluntary redundancy on that basis. In terms of just to clarify, the 90, which is the 77 FTE that have been identified, are part of the 540. So it's not an additional 540. The 540 is the entirety. Again, going back to the table in the report that adds up to 28 million. That's it. So we're trying to. So that total 27 million equates to 540. What is shown within the report is there's a kind of a waterfall diagram, and so it's saying how we make up that 27 million pounds is through all sorts of different ways. So if, and there aren't quite, but there's a lot of them. If there were 540 vacancies in our establishment, in theory, you could take this 540 out, deliver the 27 million pounds worth of savings, and there's no redundancies to be delivered at all. It won't be that many, obviously, but if there were 100, that's 100 out of the 540, which there is no consequence in terms of redundancy. If another, let's say 200, went through voluntary redundancy over the period, you've now got a total of 300 FTEs, 300 FTEs out of that 540, for which there are no compulsory redundancies. We've also, there's a senior management review. We've taken out a fifth, 20% of the assistant directors. That will probably increase as we go over the year, but at the moment it's a fifth. They are significantly more than 50,000 with all of their on costs. So again, that has a positive benefit in terms of that calculation. You've then got agency costs. So at the moment, we are spending money on agency, so you may have a post. You can't appoint to that post because it's difficult to recruit. So you've got a vacancy sat here. You can't take that vacancy out because you're currently employing an agency person against that. That agency cost is more than the cost of that vacancy. So that might be a vacancy for 30,000, but the agency costs 40,000. So what we're looking to do is try and convert as many of those agencies into our establishment. That way you reduce the additional cost. and therefore you're making a saving against the 27 million, even though it's the same person, you're just paying less because of it. So all of those things are taken into account, and that's the order that we will go through before we get to compulsory redundancies. I'm not going to sit here, and Andy wouldn't sit here now and say there are going to be no compulsory redundancies, because the reality is we cannot give that guarantee. There are very likely to be some compulsory redundancies. The point I'm making here is that's a last resort, and it will only be undertaken because financially we have to balance the books at the end of the year. We have to find a way of balancing the books, and therefore if we have to make compulsory redundancies, we will do. But again, bear in mind, as people see the operating model, as the VR program starts to work through again, people may look and say, you know what, I think there's going to be compulsory redundancies in this team. I'd rather put my hand up and go to save other people having to go through that process. And all of the other iterations of that, bumped redundancies, redeployment of staff. There are opportunities to say, we need to recruit to this vacancy, but we're not going to go externally. We have to, this is an essential post here, but we're going to redeploy somebody that may be at risk if we didn't. So all of that will be done to try and minimise the impact.
Okay, so Roger, did you want to ask something very quickly? Because
if I can, 28 million to be saved this year.
Yep.
We're now into July, around about 8 months left.
Yes.
Unfilled, I'm concerned at the council's viability, sustainability, because if those numbers there are over a year, it means that the amount of money to be saved over the reducing time is going to cause horrendous problems finding staff who want to go, who need to go. It will have to happen fairly quickly in order to balance the books.
Okay, James.
Yeah, Chair. Absolutely correct. I can't argue with that at all. There's a number of parts to this, which I'll quickly go through. The number one thing is to try and deliver that 27 million before the end of the financial year. That's your starting point, because that means you don't have that problem added into next year. That's your start. So if you get it all delivered, even if it was all delivered on the 31st of March, if posts were deleted at that point, and it meant that the delivery 4.7 million was delivered in next year, then I'll take that as a starting point, because it means you don't have any fall over into 5-6. You're absolutely correct. If you make a saving on the 1st of April 24, then you get the full year effect of that. If you make that redundancy on the 1st of October, you only get 6 months worth. That's why we have things like the general fund balance to help smooth that delivery over the period. So we've made assumptions about how much we can deliver in year, and that is already taken into account in the £38 million overspend that we're flagged at period 2. So that's not ideal, and it could get worse, because if decisions are taken which aren't in line with the assumptions that we've made, then that position would go back. However, as has already been discussed, there are some savings that are flagged at the moment as red. So assuming they aren't going to be delivered, some of those will be delivered in year. So there'll be twos and fros as we work through. And that's the important part of managing the overall budget, is that we ensure there are enough positives to offset the negatives as we go through. In terms of the impact on revenue at this point in time, it's we've made the assumptions at period 2. As at period 3, we will revise that depending on what information we have at that point in time. But we are pushing to deliver those savings as quickly as possible. Final point I'll make is going back to the point I just made earlier around vacancies. If we remove a vacancy and that vacancy has been there since the 1st of April, then when the decision is taken, you get the full 12 months of that anyway. So there will be some parts of this that have been delivered in the fullness.
Okay, thank you.
I just get childcare.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm very conscious of time, and backbenches has started. Is everyone happy that we note the times, especially in view that we have a presentation,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, the local government productivity plan, the leader has said she would like to talk to this report. If you'd like to come down, perhaps.
I'll sit way down.
Yeah, down. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to introduce this rather than ask James or Andy to introduce it. So for those of you who've been following the previous government's sort of course over offlog, you'll be aware that a letter was written to us, which I think is included in the with the agenda, from Simon Hoare, who was the then minister, to say that as part of the deal for giving us a little bit of extra money in January, that we had to fill in a productivity plan. Now I'm sort of looking at my colleagues to the left over here, literally, because we have to submit this by the end of the month. In all honesty, I think this is probably completely hypothetical, because from what I gather, I can't say that offlog won't exist, but from what I gather, I've tried to find out some more information, but let's just say that that information has not been forthcoming from either the previous government or the current government. So we will submit this plan. It is quite a bland document. We still can't find out exactly what information the then government wanted, but we have done our bit. I don't want to fall foul of not submitting it. So as you will see from the enclosed letter, they did ask us to list out a few things, and we have done that. What happens in the future, I think, is up in the air somewhat. So I didn't want James to have to say that. So hence my being here this afternoon, sitting and listening to your very interesting discussions. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. So I don't really think there's any more we can say on that. Perhaps Rosemary could have a word in the right ears.
Yes, well, I'm not expecting too much discussion at Cabinet on Wednesday either, but because it just has to go to Cabinet, and then we can send it.
Have you got anything to say? Yeah. Okie dokie, right. So we'll just note that. So the next thing is work programme. And I think we're pretty much okay for September, because we're going through all the figures and we're going to arrange that presentation as well to make it sorted for September. As I said the other day at the other meeting, I think as things move on, we want the ability to be able to put other things on. So I'm quite content to leave it as is for September. Everyone happy with that? Yeah. Right. Thank you. Yeah. David. Oh yes, sorry. David. Oh right, okay. Yeah.
I can.
Yes.
I can.
Just see what it is.